Hello and welcome again to another episode of Close Encounters. We are delighted to be able to present the fourth episode, which is going to be the last in this series. So thank you all for joining us. I know we've had a lot of people who've joined us for all of them, and people who have definitely begun to find out what this is all about. Something which is very exciting, actually, for me particularly, is that today I am joined by Rabbi Adam Edwards, who's come out of hiding from behind the scenes. What does it feel like to be out in the open, Rabbi Adam?
Feels a little bit scary, to be honest, but it's nice to be here. Nice to be here, and thank you for welcoming me tonight.
Fantastic. Looking good there. You're looking excellent. And you see there's still a career for you on the big screen ahead.
I hope so, because normally I'm behind the scenes and I control you and Rabbi Aaron, and I decide when you come on, when you come off, and I actually decide what you say and what you don't say. But tonight, that's what people don't know. People don't realize. So it's a bit scary tonight to be facing the camera, the audience, but a good opportunity for me. And nice to be here. So Peretz, who's behind the scenes tonight, Robert Goldstein, thank you for taking my job tonight. And please be kind. Please be kind to us. Please be kind to me, Rabbi Goldstein.
Always, I always will. I always am, Rabbi Edwards.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
More than I can say for Rabbi Birnbaum. Rabbi Birnbaum, you better watch out.
I do my best. We'll see. This is all part of the fun, hey? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are looking forward. Tonight, we have someone very, very special for you to meet. The situation in America has been really, I think, at the forefront of the news recently. And that is something which I think has occupied all of our minds and is really continues to occupy the minds of all of us, both in this country and, of course, in America as well. So we are delighted that today our guest is a lieutenant from the Las Vegas Police Department. Steve Riback is a 22-year veteran. He was also a co-author of a book called My Journey Home. His assignments have included jail corrections, patrol, undercover vice, violent crimes, quality assurance patrol, investigation, sexual assault, and, as we said earlier, he's currently working as a lieutenant. That's quite a list there. Steve lives with his wife and 3 children in Las Vegas. So come on, Steve, all the way from Las Vegas. Thank you for joining us, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank God. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, rabbis.
It's lovely to see you. And what's the time there in Las Vegas, just to sort of give us our bearings?
It's 12:35, just starting the afternoon. So
wow.
Just a few hours away.
Okay, so as we end our day, you begin yours, and it's probably already hotter there than it ever gets in London. Or what sort of temperature is it in Las Vegas at the moment?
Yeah, it's today it's about 108 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know the translation or the switching with us to Celsius, but it's hot.
Very hot.
Very hot.
Wow, amazing. Gosh, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you again for having me. It was an absolute honor and a pleasure.
Okay, so our what we're going to do is we're going to begin. Adam, are you with us? You okay? Okay, we're going to begin by asking you some questions, if that's okay. I mean, the truth is that the first thing which really kind of is intriguing about you is we saw that video with Trump, with Donald Trump, where you appeared there and you're wearing a kippah, sort of, very proudly wearing a large black kippah. And I think it's kind of rare to see a police officer, very proudly displaying his large black kippah. And in your book, you tell the story of your Jewish journey and the resistance that you encounter, the difficulties that you encountered from, within the police force. So I was wondering if maybe you could begin with, sharing some of that, your own personal journey with us.
Absolutely. Definitely journey is the word for it. So about 22, a little bit over 22 years ago, I decided to join the police department. But about 17, 18 years ago, I was in the process of dating, and somebody I was dating knew a local rabbi here in Las Vegas, and invited me to a Shabbat meal for their house for Friday night. And I grew up a complete secular existence. I was born Jewish. Both my parents are Jewish, but I didn't know anything about Judaism at all. And so I decided I would go to this friend, with this friend to the rabbi's house. And essentially, when I sat there during the night, I saw the kiddush, the rabbi making the blessing on the wine and the cutting of the challah and the brachas, the blessings and the singing. And it was just such an electric atmosphere. And I sat there, and interestingly enough, I was so taken aback by, and I was so moved by the situation. And I literally say that watching the Rebbitzin, the rabbi's wife, that night light Shabbos candles lit a spark in me that's burning very, very brightly even today. And I sat there that night for the couple hours that I was there, and part of me was just so I was enraged. I was so disgusted at myself, and I was so angry that here I was, a Jew in this day and age, even though 17, 18 years ago, I didn't know anything about my religion. I didn't know anything about my heritage. And I thought about the Holocaust and the discrimination and the oppression that had happened to us as Jews through our existence. And I just felt being so uneducated was just terribly disrespectful. And so I said to myself that night that I have to make some changes. And I didn't know what it meant at that time. I had no clue. But I just knew I needed to educate myself. And even if it was picking up one book and finding out what is Shabbat even about. And it eventually, over a series of years, it was not overnight, but it was several years. Eventually, I grew to a more observant lifestyle. When I say observant, meaning that keep the Sabbath 100% of the time, or 1/7 of the time, I should say, on Friday and Saturday, and keep kosher 100% of the time, and wear my yarmulke, wear a beard, my tzitzis, and so it slowly evolved, and that led to a little bit of friction with my police department, but had to. I don't know how the court system works within the United Kingdom, but essentially my department was not so favorable about me growing in my Yiddishkeit and my Judaism, and so we had a little bit of a friction. When I know you gave the list of all my assignments, but when I started to make these transitions, I was working undercover, and so at the time working undercover, the rules were very relaxed. And I know we spoke the other day, but I worked undercover. Involved like drugs and prostitution and buying and selling drugs, and a lot of the time, I purported myself as an English businessman. So I perfected my English accent, so I could switch it around like just a little bit here and there, and make it like I was a businessman. And I would say I'm from London, and I had a passport, and I would put my luggage in the boot, and I would take a lift, but I
love it. Well done, Steve.
I would. I would, seamlessly transition between this undercover role. But as I was trying to grow in my Yiddishkeit, I could wear my head covering, underneath a baseball hat or a fashionable hat, wear the beard any length. But my department, unfortunately, didn't initially was not accepting of it, and so they put up a lot of roadblocks, quite a bit of challenges. But thank God I persevered. I had to go through the federal court system. And won in a lot of respects, and then they allowed a few changes as well. And ultimately, as I progressed, they did a complete 180. I was allowed to wear my yarmulke and beard in uniform, and then that brings me a long-winded answer to the Trump video. And so about 4 or 5 months ago, President Trump was in Las Vegas for there was a graduation ceremony of a program here we call Hope for Prisoners. And I volunteer, and I'm very active in that program. It's a prisoner reentry program. It's a reintegration program for people who have been arrested, spent any time in jail or prison. And I had actually been involved in that program for the past 5 years, when the president recognized a woman, her name is Lois, and myself for a situation we were involved in about 8 years ago. So I don't know if you want me to get into that story.
No. That's really good. I mean, it's fascinating. Adam, can you hear us now? Are you with us?
Oh yeah.
Great.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Good to have you back. Good to have you back. Okay. No, it's just, I mean, it's fascinating. The story, I think, particularly the resistance that you encountered from the police force, that must have been very, very difficult. And I think especially, some of the viewers may be asking themselves, there are many Jews who do manage to operate in their workplace, whatever there may be, maybe not the police force, without any sort of visible signs that they're Jewish. And can you explain to our viewers, it was obviously so important for you. You fought a whole legal battle, which is what you detail in your book, just to be able to sort of keep a short beard and to be able to cover your head, wear a kippah at work. Can you explain to the viewers who are wondering why that was so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. First, as I started to grow and I started to learn, I started to really understand the physical mitzvahs. Why it was important to daven, to pray 3 times a day, to lay tefillin, the flatteries. And so as I started to learn about these mitzvahs, they really spoke to me. And I would say that keeping the head covering and the beard, it absolutely just spoke to me. I remember reading about, in the Holocaust, people were, Jewish men were held down against their will, and they were forced to shave their beards, or their beards were cut. And so that really spoke to me of just how important it is, and the holiness of the beard. It was something that to me just became very, very important. And I mean, I would never, speak ill about anybody who does or doesn't, or trims or doesn't trim. I obviously trim my beard, but I felt that with the police department we could come to a compromise, and I really felt that it was something that could be done. It was not a very big hardship for the department for me to wear a yarmulke. And I would like to point out, first and foremost, I had asked if I could wear a yarmulke or a plain hat, or if I was in uniform, even we had baseball caps in our as part of our uniform. Not like a Bobby where you wear the Bobby hat real high, but we just have plain baseball caps that say Las Vegas Police on it. And so the department wouldn't even allow me to wear that. And so it became, the legs to it. But really, the real answer is it really felt in my neshama, in my soul, like this was something that was very important. And so I felt that certain compromises are important when you're having conversations or you're dialoguing with people. And then certain aspects, if they're important to you, I firmly believe you can work something out and you can come to an agreement. And I felt that I was undercover, and I was keeping my head covered. I was observing a Torah observant lifestyle, and I had heard people that had said, "Well, no, I can't do it. It's too difficult in my assignment." I mean, I or whatever their profession is, and I would call shenanigans on that. I would say, you can. It's not easy. But one of my favorite quotes is that if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And I think that's very important for people to know, that you can grow and you can make positive steps in your life. Sometimes they're slow, sometimes they're very huge increments, but everybody can do it, absolutely. And I'm proof of it.
Beautiful. It's a really beautiful thought, actually, to take through life. And also, I think what's amazing is the way that how you explain all of this journey kind of began. The catalyst for it was just the Shabbat meal. We don't realize sometimes how powerful it can be just to sit at a Shabbat table, and to see the beauty of a Shabbat meal, to share that with other people is it's a beautiful thing. So it's amazing to hear. It's a beautiful story.
Steve,
it was amazing, and I continually thank the Rebbitzin for what she did. And she said I was doing no different than I did every Friday night.
Good chicken soup she made that night, hey?
It's amazing. The desserts were phenomenal.
Steve, if I can, after all you've been through with the police force and the court cases that you went through, I'd be interested to hear, what level of prejudice, or I'm reluctant to call it anti-Semitism, but what level of prejudice do you still encounter in 2020, be it from the hierarchy in the police force, be it from your fellow officers, and also be very interested to know, just on the beats, just when you're on the streets of Las Vegas, do you ever experience anti-Semitism or any racial prejudice demonstrated towards yourself?
Yes, well, I would say early on in my career, especially when I started going through this process of inquiring about getting some religious accommodations, I did have some specific anti-Semitic incidents that occurred with fellow officers, fellow detectives, which were very disappointing. Going through them, but in some of them, and I outline or I go into more detail within my book of some of them. There was one in particular, to not go into too much length of it, but one I did not address it right away when it occurred. It was a situation where a fellow detective made a comment. It was a very derogatory comment, insinuating death within the Holocaust, and I took a few seconds to process it, and in my mind it was like time froze, and I internalized, do I address it? How do I address it? I was in a group of people. My supervisor was there at the time. I was waiting for my supervisor to interject. He didn't. So eventually it felt like he approved what this person had said. And as I sat there for a few seconds, and the seconds turned, to more seconds, and then a minute, I ended up not saying anything. And I told myself, I'm never going to just take a back seat to somebody saying something. And that was my first situation of ever encountering anything like that on the department. And so I did have a few more. Unfortunately, I was not trying to challenge myself of like, hey, I hope I get more instances to address. But unfortunately, they did occur, and each one I did address. And I think people saw that it was unacceptable behavior. And, they made, comments that maybe they didn't feel were derogatory, or they were just common language. I remember somebody talking about like lowering a price of something. I was involved in an undercover operation. I was buying drugs or something to that effect. And when I had lowered the price that I was asking, somebody later said like, "Oh, that was great how you Jewed the person down." And so I don't think, and they didn't know necessarily that I was observant at the time. And I want to make it clear, while I was working undercover, I wasn't wearing a yarmulke or my tzitzis out or anything. It wasn't that I wasn't proud to be Jewish. I just didn't feel that that's in the environment that I was at, buying and selling drugs and picking up.
Didn't fit the drug dealer persona.
Yeah, so it's but I think it was just having a conversation and people understanding that, hey, that's not acceptable, or that's not it's not a everyday term. And so early on, my department had some problems with, as I said, I had to enact the lawsuit over it, the issues. But I think it was just, I don't know if it was an ignorance, just a misunderstanding. They weren't very familiar with Judaism or Jewish people. So I think it was a little foreign. And so it took them a while to really see, hey, we could work together. It doesn't have to be a me versus you. Let's sit down and have a conversation. And so the anti-Semitism, at least towards me, once I started to go through my battle, and again, that was probably that was about 2004 to about 2007, 2008. From that point on, it really subsided, and I have a great working relationship with the department. It's one of those situations that I try to be a positive person, that if it took all of that negativity to get to where we are today, then it was all worth it. It was all hashgacha pratis. It was all God's hand at work. But in terms of prejudice, that now that I encounter, I really don't see it. I don't see it towards me, towards Judaism. I see people that they're confused. They see the yarmulke when I'm in uniform. Some know what it is, some don't know what it is, some will ask questions. some department, and I'm talking about department members, fellow officers, or citizens that I encounter, and I welcome it. I see it as it's it's an honor to me to carry the torch, so to speak, of Judaism, because it is such an outward display of religion. And I mean, I get that people will wear in other religions, there will crosses or other relics that identify what religion they are. But I think with the Judaism as the yarmulke, that is a for lack of a better word, that's an in-your-face kind of a display. But it's something that I tried to explain to the department that when I do so, I believe in that higher power. I believe in that being viewed by the public in a positive light and doing the right thing is so important, because I am readily identifying myself as a Jew, and I don't want to bring any negative light to our religion.
Yeah, 100%. I remember actually, I once had a Shabbat guest at my house, and he was telling me that as a lawyer, he had never worn a kippah before at work. He'd never worn a yarmulke, and then he suddenly started to wear one. And he's standing there in court, and he suddenly felt like a huge burden of responsibility. He was like, now I represent the Jewish people. I'm not just representing my client. If I'm honest and I act with integrity, then everyone says, wow, that's a Jewish person who's honest. And if not, then the other way. So like you're saying, it's an amazing thing. It gives that awareness, and you're aware that other people know that you're Jewish, and that's it's a game changer, I'm sure, in the way that you relate to people and they relate to you, which is an amazing thing.
Absolutely, yeah. You nailed it right. You hit it right on the head there. Perfect explanation.
Yeah. Before we continue, because Adam and I are bursting with questions, but we thought we're going to be very kind to share you with some of our viewers. So if anyone would like to ask Steve a question, this is your chance, okay? After you've been shouting at the news on television about the Black Lives Matter protests, or you want to know what it's like to be a Las Vegas Police Department from religious Jewish police officer. So this is the link that you have to do. You have to click on that link or copy and paste that link. And then you just have to WhatsApp our producer. And when you do that, you just need to give him your name, tell him the topic of your question, and then you will be able to come on live to ask Steve your questions, okay? So use that link now, and we will get you on live very, very soon. Okay, so Steve, with your permission, I'd just like to switch to that hot topic really of the moment, which is the Black Lives Matter protests or movement as it's now sort of evolved into. And we've been watching from the UK. I mean, the epicenter has been in America, obviously, and we've had protests here as well. But nevertheless, the epicenter has been in America there. And tragically, the truth is that we've seen lots of violent scenes. We've seen many violent protests, including people who've been injured, even in Las Vegas. There, I know there was one police officer. I think it's Shay Michelonis, who's terribly awfully now paralyzed. So, I mean, I'd like to hear from you, sort of, on the inside. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in policing the protests? And maybe something about what happened to your fellow officer.
Yes. So the protests really started kicking off, right around a month ago, a little bit over a month ago. Since the protest began, we've had, I believe our department's count is about 125 various protests of various attendees. We've had some of several thousand to just a few, like 4 or 5 attendees. But we're still staffing and manning these protests. Some of them I shudder to call them protests. I call them rioting, looting, destructive behaviors. But specifically, it was a little bit over a month ago. Was really when we were at the epicenter. Really, the flames had been really fanned here in Las Vegas, and for a series of days we had to go out and keep the peace, as we do every day. But these were especially contentious. The crowds were huge. I mean, thousands and thousands of citizens that were there. And, it doesn't, a crowd or a mob mentality, it doesn't take much to agitate a crowd. I mean, one person, 2 people can really agitate a crowd of thousands. And, it was a very, very dangerous situation. We had riot gear on, we had helmets on, protective, we call it turtle gear, like shells of different equipment. But unfortunately, the destruction, the violence, the hatred, the rhetoric was anything but peaceful for several nights. I was standing shoulder to shoulder with my fellow brothers and sisters. We were taking. It was almost like you could describe it as a war. I mean, we were taking rocks. People were throwing rocks and boulders, chunks of concrete. They were throwing frozen water bottles. Intentionally, they're frozen to make them harder, so when they hit somebody, causes tremendous amount of damage. Somebody from my station was hit with the frozen water bottle in the shoulder. It separated and had a broken shoulder because of it. And then the worst incident that happened, that's one of the nights I was working. It was about 2 miles away from where I was at. Officer Shea Michelonis, as you described, was assisting in the protest. They were trying to move a crowd of protesters, and then about 50 to 75 yards away, a male suspect, turned around over his shoulder and fired one round from his gun at a group of police officers. And where Shea was working, it hit him directly into the face, and just horrific chain of events. It went through his face completely. It bounced around a little bit within his head, severed part of his spine, and he was paralyzed from that point on. Needs breathing treatment. I'm not sure if it's a respirator or a ventilator. I'm not sure exactly what, but and that's in critical condition is where he lies even to this day. And I just it's incredibly tragic because especially over the what seems to be the reason or the rationale for the riots, and the outrage over the George Floyd situation. As police officers, we share in that same outrage that the community throughout the country and throughout the world, because I know you guys also in the UK have felt it as well. We feel that same outrage and disgust over the actions of the officers. And we, especially in America with the Constitution, we stand wholeheartedly by the Constitution and the due process and going through the justice system. And that's what's happening. And the officer, rightfully so, has been arrested. It was criminal activity for that to happen. And so we also look at it with a little bit of confusion of what more do you want? Because we want that justice. We want people held accountable, and we believe that happens. But unfortunately, people are allowed to assemble and they're allowed to protest. I agree with that. I just ask people to do so in the right manner. You have your day in court. You have your right way of carrying out when you feel you're being wronged or there's injustice. There's a right way to speak out, and the violence, the destruction, the damage, the injuries, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, that's what you're saying, Steve. Obviously, makes sense on an intellectual level. You're saying that there's a constitution, and the constitution agrees that the police officers did something wrong, and there's a due process, and the due process should be followed. And there's a right and a wrong way to react to the criminal offences that they carried out. Again, we in the UK can only go by mainly what we see and what we hear and what we read in the UK press. The feeling that I pick up, however, is that the people in America are so frustrated due to the fact that they feel that this isn't a one-off event. They say that this is something that has been happening not just in 1991 to Rodney King, but predating Rodney King, And ever since Rodney King, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed since 91, when Rodney King was beaten up by those police officers. And therefore, when you say there's due process, I'm sure there is, but surely one can understand and appreciate the build-up of emotion and frustration, that one can't just say there's a due process and these police officers that started these current protests will be put to prison. But it's not enough. Surely it's not enough. Nothing has changed since 91. How would you respond to that?
I would say that a lot has changed. I mean, I do want to take a step back and say that I am looking at this from a set of eyes, being in Las Vegas. The police department where I work, we're probably within the top 5 of the largest police agencies in the country. We are very, very well trained. I think we're very progressive in the sense of learning from situations that happen not only within our department but countrywide. We have a tremendous amount of training, tremendous amount of tools at our disposal, and we continually work to improve our relationships with the department, our relationships with the community. We are very, very proactive in that regard. So a lot of the angst and this rhetoric of pervasive racism or bias-based policing, I honestly don't see it. I really don't see it in Las Vegas. And I mean, we're an extremely diverse community. I think we're just as diverse as anywhere else in the country, but I just don't see it. And when I'm looking around throughout the country and I'm looking at statistics, I mean, certainly there are high-profile instances that make the news. And I will say that in looking at the Rodney King situation in '91, if we just look in and of itself of the video, that doesn't always paint the true picture of what's going on, but it certainly does appear of excessive force or brutality in the situation. Uses of force by the police, inherently, they're ugly. There is nothing pretty about putting hands on somebody. I mean, it's if you think of a parent who gives a spanking to a child, there's nothing pretty about that. Or if you got to wrestle with somebody as a police officer to arrest them, it's not a pretty job. It doesn't look good. And even as we train as well as we do, it doesn't always turn out as well as we would hope it does. And so the facts also do not stand to the rhetoric that goes on. And I think that the media really has kind of fueled a lot of the flames. That when you put an instance up, I mean, we have millions and millions of interactions throughout the country as police officers with citizens. And the percentage of those interactions that actually result in a use of force are, to say negligible would be, even insufficient. We're talking about a 0.000, I think it's like 5 zeros, and then numbers of the percentage of that we use uses of force. And that's not even accounting for any uses of force that may not be justified. So we could make an argument that many of the uses of forces are justified, and I will make an argument that there are certainly uses of force that are not justified without a proper investigation and knowing what's going on. I'm never going to say that officers are completely in the right, but I do believe that we get it correct a very, very high percentage of the time. So I hear terms of there's pervasiveness or systemic. The statistics just do not support that at all. And then again, to get back to the original question, I don't see it at all in Las Vegas, and I just don't see it. What we see on the media is a situation, and then it's, oh, this is happening everywhere. I remember years ago there was there was an article about shark attacks off the coast of Florida. Well, there was no real other news that were going on, and they kept reporting these shark attacks, and all of a sudden nobody wanted to go swimming anymore. And a few months later, somebody said, well, hey, actually, the amount of shark attacks is like half of what they are every year. Just now we're reporting them. So when you put it in the face of people, that's what they see. And I think that's a situation of what's happening here. And I don't want to say at all that unjustified uses of force do not occur. I would never say that. They're out there. But, the expression is a few bad apples in the bunch. I mean, we don't judge everybody based on the outcome of one person. I wouldn't send my kids to school and say, you know what, there's abuse that happens by teachers, so all the teachers in this school are terrible. Or a priest or a rabbi does something wrong. Well, every priest or rabbi, or every lawyer, every doctor. We don't judge people like that. We should look at each situation in and of itself, and hope that the process, as we say, a due process, carries out and justice is served.
I mean, yeah, I hear that, and you put the point across very, very well. The truth is, and I think it's amazing to hear it from kind of the inside perspective rather than just the media, like we see things, from the outside, which is always difficult. But I mean, I guess part of the problem is that here in the UK, our police don't even carry guns. That's just the society, that we live, that we're used to. So it's very rare to see police officers shooting, let alone chokeholds, which have been another thing that's been in the news. I mean, do you think that there is, despite the fact that there's only a small number, which, I totally understand, but nevertheless, do you think that there is a need to reform, the police force in some way, to make sure that these things sort of don't happen again as much as it's possible to prevent that?
I mean, it is a very good question that you raise. I believe that certainly guns play a role. I think that guns play a role on the flip side for the suspects or the subjects that are carrying the guns, because the police are not actively hunting, so to speak, any race, any religion. We're out there going towards where we are called upon, for any calls for service. We're not going out there and putting chokeholds or, using force on people until we encounter the situation. And I believe the situation in Atlanta with the use of the taser, I think that if you look at that whole situation in its entirety, in the totality of the circumstance, not just the actual use of force, but you had the officers, I want to say it was like 25 minutes. They were dealing with this suspect who was a drunk driver. They had dealt with him for a very long length of time before. And I think that the important thing to remember is the police officers' actions certainly play a part, but so do the other side, the actions of the suspects. And I'd be curious to know, especially in the UK, I am aware of that there is not a lot of guns there, and I mean I think that certainly there's a great argument of success of it. But do you guys have violent crime? Is there a high property crime? What is the crime levels in general? I guess would be my question back to you. I know you guys are doing the interview, but I'm going to ask that question if you guys know.
I'm sure Adam knows. Adam, go for it. Give us some crime statistics.
Yeah, maybe after the next question, I've done my research.
Yeah. Just before that, we'd love someone to come on. We've had some messages. People are reticent to come on live. Steve is a very nice guy. He's a police officer. He's not going to arrest you unless you've done something wrong, that is. Steve, people are nervous to come on live.
I'm way across the pond. I'm too far.
He's too far. You can run. So we've had some messages. So keep on messaging those questions in. You can do that on Facebook Messenger as well, or on YouTube. But if you'd like to come on live, then please do use that link, which you can see going across the screen at the bottom there. Thank you.
So Steve, so you mentioned already the issue of the people, the citizens that you are facing, and the fact that they obviously do bear arms. So it's interesting. I saw a statistic, and obviously we all know that statistics can tell us anything we want them to tell us. But I saw a statistic that every day in the US, 100 people are shot and murdered, 100 people a day. And obviously we know, everybody in the United Kingdom knows, because we're all well educated about these things about America, that the US Second Amendment guarantees the right of every US citizen to bear arms. There was obviously the Brady Law in 1994 that was meant to allow for greater background checks into people trying to purchase laws. But we all know that anybody who wants to circumvent such background checks have been able to do so. What's interesting, I'm sure everybody saw in the news that since Corona, I think was it March or April alone, 2 million Americans bought guns, fearing the breakdown of society due to Corona, and another 2 million guns were purchased, which is an incredible statistic, especially for us in the UK. So with so many people buying guns, with so many US citizens bearing arms, and not all of them having had, I don't know the statistic of how many of those bearing arms have actually had a background check, but let's say many of them have not been background checked. And 100 US citizens being shot and murdered every day. Let me ask you, what needs to be done to protect US citizens from gun violence? What needs to be done to protect US police officers such as yourself and your colleague from gun violence?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts and components to that question, but an excellent question. Excellent question. It's hard. It's hard if you look at it, because certainly, I am somebody who I believe in the Constitution. I think that it's very, very important to the fabric of this country and how we operate. And I'm definitely a proponent of Second Amendment, of all amendments. The problem with gun ownership, I think, in America, and this is my own opinion, is it's not the legal gun owners that we seem to have the issues with. It's the illegal gun owners, gang members, people that are just engaged in illegal activity of, that are burglars or robbers. They break into somebody's home, and now they've broken into somebody's home, and now they steal a gun, and now that gun is out. So I'm always an advocate of keeping your guns in safes and making them not easily accessible to people. I've seen a lot of statistics with guns of, it's like, if we were to give a gun to every person in America, any age, even babies and children, it's like 5 or 6 guns for every American. And I mean, that's a tremendous amount of weaponry out there. And we know the negative effects of, the statistics you touted of, 100 deaths a day. I don't know how we could get to a situation like the UK where we don't have a prevalence of it, because I don't think that people willingly are going to give up their guns, especially when you bring up that 2 million just went and bought them. They are buying them specifically so nobody takes them, that they can arm themselves. But I think it's almost like the bad apples spoil the bunch in that regard, where you have people that are gun owners, but the ones that are legally having it, they have it for sport or home protection. We don't have issues typically with those types of people. Now, you do have domestic violences that will transpire, and then they'll got a gun versus a gun, or a gun on a person. And I'd have to see the details of what transpired within those 100 murders and deaths a day that happen, because with for domestic violence questions or domestic violence incidences, that's a very personal murder that occurs, or violence that occurs, that in my training, if they didn't use a gun, they would get a different weapon at whatever point that they were going to use that violence upon them. So gang members who do shootings and drive-by shootings, those they may turn to knives or other type of incendiary devices. It's hard to say at this point, without knowing the details of those incidences. But the gun violence is a big problem, and I don't know that changing the background checks, certainly that's helpful, but I'd also like to see how many people are caught in a background check that were prevented buying a gun that shouldn't have, because we have a big mental illness problem in this country. I would say that's an epidemic, drug use epidemic, that maybe you bought a gun, you were not mentally ill, or you're able to get around the background check in somewhere, or present yourself as you're medicated and you're fine, and then you're off your medication, and that's when you turn into a situation where then you go out and you use your gun. So it's just not so easy, as unfortunately we're not able to see the future, as we know. To know that not every crime can be prevented, but I would say that based on my limited knowledge of the UK, you guys seem to have at least in the right direction. With limiting people from being in control of guns.
Yeah,
Steve, I know I know Americans are quite fiercely defend all the amendments, and I know there's a huge gun lobby in America that contributes greatly to whichever political figure will defend their right to bear arms. I just wonder, again, the question was, what can be done to protect US citizens from gun violence and policemen like yourself from gun violence? And one of the things that I have seen suggested, and again, I'm asking for your thoughts on this, often the weapon of choice for these mass murders that we see is the weapons are these huge capacity magazines that spray thousands of bullets in seconds. These are not weapons that are necessary to defend one's home, for sports. These are just weapons of mass destruction. Is that not something that could be done to curtail the use of such weapons, for example? What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. It's a good point, and that there's always that talking point that comes out when, unfortunately, we have these, these mass shootings and the critical incidents. And I mean, Las Vegas is not immune to it at all from the 1 October situation. Sure. Almost 3 years ago, and because we had a situation of there was a bump stock, an illegal type of. Well, I think it was actually legal at the time, that made semi-automatic weapon rifle a fully automatic, or at least capable of it. Unfortunately, I think with the advent of the internet and people their own minds working, they're able to manipulate. And I'm not a gun nut in the sense of so proficient with how it operates. But I do know that there's people that can manipulate any weapon to make it work how they want to work, which is very troubling, obviously, for law enforcement, because we try to stay one step ahead, but it seems like we're always, a close second behind the times of, we're catching people as they've done something, as opposed to getting ahead of it. So I really, to answer that question, it's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that, because then I think about, okay, if we said collectively we're going to get rid of every type of weaponry that is fully automatic or that was high powered, I just don't know logistically how we do that. And if we were going to enforce that, how do we go and carry it out? With the Fourth Amendment here, the right to reasonable searches and seizures. How would we go and collect these items? That would be a very difficult issue. And then we say, okay, well, people are grandfathered in; they can keep it, but no new sales. But we still have thousands, if not millions, of items out there that are potentially dangerous. So I'm going to give you the safe answer on this. I really honestly don't know, but I mean it's certainly I'm willing to hear people's thoughts, and I think there is a level of necessity to it, because ultimately we want to protect the greater good and protect society and limit the murders and the danger out there. I honestly don't know. I don't know how we do it. I would hope our politicians and our government have some good ideas that can lead us down that road.
It definitely is a difficult struggle, and actually one of our viewers has just sent me a question. Hearing the figures, which, can I say, Adam has prepared quite well, thorough questions there. I hadn't heard of all these amendments before tonight. Well done. That is very impressive questioning there. But so one of our viewers has messaged me to ask the following question from you, Steve. You're a religious Jew. You've got, we said, a few kids and a wife there in Las Vegas. To get up in the morning and to put yourself in the front line, it must be extremely difficult. From a Jewish perspective, one of the most important mitzvahs is to look after our lives. And obviously, from the perspective of your family, how do you deal with that, knowing that you may well be in the firing line?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question, and it's one that I give my wife first and foremost a tremendous amount of credit, because I could not. I could not imagine what she goes through and the internalizing of what my job entails. I know what I do every day because I go out and I see it with my own eyes and I hear it with my own ears. But to sit at home or lay in bed and just, the unknown, it's got to be a struggle. And, it is a very, very interesting job, because I got in it. I wanted, for the simple fact is I wanted to help people. I wanted to do good in this world. I wanted to do, even though I wasn't, observant at the time. I mean, these are all Jewish values of, helping other people and being a part of something bigger than myself. But to know that, it's a thankless job. It's a difficult job. One that, when I kiss my kids goodbye on my way to work, and I kiss my wife and hug them, that it could be my last, it definitely weighs on me. And I would say this last month, it definitely weighs on me a lot more than it ever has. And that's, to be completely candid, because, I mean, life is precious. We know that. I mean, it's, but it's just, I really think to analyze the job, it's, I don't know, and I get a little emotional from it, because it's just interesting. Because now I think people are hopefully they're getting a perspective of what it's like for the police officers. And I think what's lost in a lot of this is the humanistic side. We are all human beings. I mean, if we really start to, okay, let's know about you and you know about me. If we really start this checklist and we do a running log, we have a heck of a lot more in common than we do differences. And we as officers, and I proudly represent, not only as a Jew, but as a human being, we have the same emotions. We have our same fears and anxieties and worries, and we have these same struggles, and yet that's getting muddied and that's getting lost. And it's like, it's an us versus them. And we're all human beings. But if you really break down what a police officer does, it's absolutely nothing short of heroic. Because when the dangerous situations are happening and people are calling for police, we're going there. And we are going there without a thought or hesitation of race, religion, gender, anything. We're going there to simply help people. And if you really think about it, the sane, rational, normal person, when there's danger, they're running as far away from it as possible, and we're doing the most unnatural of running directly towards it. And to me, that's true definition of a hero, and one that it's not lost on me. And so when you break that down and you say, hey, you know what, I'm driving to work after kissing my family, that this could be it. I mean, it's hard, but it really, I think it really grounds me to know that I have this incredible responsibility as both a police officer and a Jew to go out and do the right thing every day and do my absolute best to get home to my family and to get home to my community.
I think hearing you say that, heroic is definitely the right word. And especially 100%. especially as you said over the last month, which has probably been a very scary time to be a police officer in America. And not only have you not been thanked for it, but unfortunately many have vilified you for doing that job. And it's, I think, incredibly impressive to hear, your dedication to the job. I feel like, if it was up to me to thank you on behalf of all of us regular citizens, we appreciate people like you. We appreciate the police force. I speak
Thank
for
you.
us here in the UK and all over the world,
Thank you. And I think it's, it's an easy, some people reach out about, hey, what can I do? What can I do to help? And exactly what you just did, Rabbi, was excellent. Words are very, very powerful. It's why at any point rabbis convey their thoughts, and why both of you are in, I hold rabbis to such a high level of esteem, because words are powerful. And I look to you for inspiration and motivation. But people also have that power. It's not, you have to be a rabbi and, in order to convey that. I mean, it's you truly never know the effect that you have on people. And that's, going back to your original question with the Trump video. I arrested the woman in that video 8 years ago. And from that incident, I had no idea, but she cleaned herself up. She was pregnant that night, gave birth to her son that night, unbeknownst to her, and a whole chain of events happened there. And the big takeaway for me is, what I just said is that you don't know the effect that you have on people. And I was simply doing my job. I wasn't super cop that day saying, hey, I'm going to go out and save a life today and save this woman. It's not what happened. But, but God puts this incredible power into us, that even though we're one person, we can affect people. And so you simply saying thank you to me has a tremendous amount of an effect. And I think to the people that are listening and hearing this, they have that effect too. Go to a police officer, go to anybody. I mean, it doesn't have to simply be just a police officer, but on topic of a police officer, thank somebody for that, because those words have meaning, and it's such an awesome power to tell people how you feel. And I think that's part of what will get people to move in the direction of, you know what, they kind of understand me, I kind of understand it. Let's dialogue. Let's have a conversation like this to get to know each other and what we're about. Because I think that's missing, at least in the US, that rhetoric. It's not happening.
Agreed. You know what? I think that's a beautiful takeaway point. Our time is just about up. But I think, Adam, I'm sure you'll agree with me. If there's one thing that we can take away and our viewers can take away, it should be to appreciate the amazing, awesome job that the police force do for us, and to show that appreciation. I think maybe that's something which we can take away from tonight.
Thank you.
Definitely. Steve, it's been a real honor, actually, and a privilege to meet you and to speak with you. And we appreciate your honesty and your giving the frankness of your answers and being prepared. You told us we can ask you anything.
Yes.
Don't hold back. And there's been very refreshing to just to hear your approach and your thoughts on what's been a very difficult time. For us, really, we're outsiders looking in, and it's been very hard for us to get a perspective that we feel is a genuine and honest perspective. Because, as you said, the media focuses us. Really, the media really tells us how to think based on what they want us to think.
Right.
And because of that, it's hard for us to get a real, genuine, truthful perspective. And so it's been really, really worthwhile to hear from you, somebody who's on the ground, who has been at the sharp end of what has been a really troubling few months for the entire world, really. And therefore, we really thank you. I think just before we do say goodbye, and you can have a final word as well. Don't worry. We do want to mention that you have written a book about your own personal journey, and it's called a Journey Home. Is that right?
My Journey Home. My
Journey Home. You can actually buy it on Amazon in the UK as well. And what's it? Just tell us briefly what it covers, Steve.
It covers my life and my transformation and my return to Judaism, and it just it's a book about learning about yourself, and I think there's a lot of wonderful themes in it of that there's everybody can take away something from it, of growing in your Judaism, growing in your Yiddishkeit, standing up for what you believe in, but just ultimately being proud of your Judaism in whatever level that you hold. I'm not trying to aspire somebody to go work as a police officer with a beard and yarmulke, but you can grow in your own life, in any small way, one step. The journey of 1,000 miles is one step, and so there's something for everybody in the book. And I also have a website. It's koshercop.com. People can send me if they have any questions, or if they didn't get their question answered, or they were too shy. They could reach out to me there. I would be more than happy to answer questions. And rabbis, whoever questions we didn't get to, you can forward those on to me, and I'd be happy to answer those. But the honor to be here tonight is absolutely mine, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak across the pond, and hopefully people were able to get some insight of a little bit of what it's like in the world of police work at this time.
Thank you so much for joining us. Keep on doing that thing. Keep on being a hero.
Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, that was fascinating.
It really was.
It really was a fascinating end to the story. I mean, what I found deeply moving actually is when he started describing his own feelings going out in the morning. I cannot imagine what that feels like, to leave your house in the morning, going into the riots, not knowing whether you're going to be able to come back, and doing all of that selflessly because you are so committed to that cause of being there and of helping, other people. I think that's an amazing thing, right?
100%. And the whole journey that he's had, and still being able to be so committed to a job that in itself put hurdles in his own path and his own journey in Judaism, and still be so committed to that police force is also very, very impressive as well. So
yeah. Look, this series has been all about new perspectives, and I think we've definitely seen some, fascinating new perspectives. So obviously from Steve tonight, back from to the beginning when we had Ari Lesser rapping away there at the beginning, and Rabbi Goldberg then teaching us how to breathe in properly, and we had after that we had, who was next, Adam? Just
Yosef
testing
Haddad.
Yosef Haddad. Yeah, Yosef Haddad was number 3. So it's been a fascinating series. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We are going to be back. The good news is, okay, we're going to be back in September. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be better. We are looking forward to some cutting-edge pre-Rosh Hashanah close encounters sessions to bring you some perspectives on Rosh Hashanah as we approach the Judgment Day, that is Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish New Year. We're going to bring you some perspectives on judgment and what that means from some more fascinating people around the world. Meanwhile, we hope that everyone has a good break, that you've enjoyed this series, our first in series of Close Encounters. That is good night from me.
And good night from me and from Rabbi Aaron Litwin.